Dread choked him. Gunpowder singed his nostrils. Failure wasn't an option. 100 Lakota war cries shattered the dawn quiet as warriors on horseback encircled his barn. The rising sun revealed their fierce painted faces and drawn bows aimed at his heart. Smoke curled from smoldering arrows lodged in the roof. Without hesitating, he sprinted for his horse and snatched the long rifle gathering dust by the porch. Hooves thundered as he raced toward the ridge. Minutes later, he spotted them. 3 gaunt wolves circling a small Lakota boy pressed against a boulder. The boy's terrified cries carried on the wind, urging Jake faster. He loaded a round with shaking hands. He hadn't fired a shot in years, but there was no time to second guess. A wolf lunged, snarling. Jake fired once. The crack tore through the evening, echoing off the pines. One wolf yelped and crumpled into the grass, dust exploding around its body. The other 2 turned their yellow eyes toward Jake. He slid off his horse and slammed another cartridge home. A second wolf sprang for his throat. Jake braced and pulled the trigger. Click. Misfire. Cold fear shot through him. He had 1 bullet left. With a roar, he swung the rifle like a club, catching the wolf in mid-leap. Bone crunched as the animal hit the ground, whimpering. The sharp scent of whiskey and herbs filled the air as she cleaned the gash on the child's leg. Jake's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He paced on the straw-strewn floorboards, ears straining for any sound beyond the barn walls. Silas Jones burst in, breathless and clutching a lantern. The old rancher's eyes went wide at the sight of the unconscious Lakota boy on the cot. "Lord above, Jake," he rasped, voice trembling. "You know whose son that might be." He pointed to an ornate beaded necklace around the boy's neck. Jake swallowed hard. The pattern was one he recognized, the mark of Chief Running Elk's family. "He's burning up, Jake. He might not last the night without medicine from his tribe." Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone with fear. Jake's gut twisted. Ride through the dark to the Lakota camp and risk a deadly misunderstanding. Or wait for dawn and pray the boy survived until then. He felt cornered by 2 bad options. Midnight neared, every minute an eternity. Then a distant drumbeat rolled across the plains, thumping like a giant heartbeat in the dark. Nora's breath caught. Silas tightened his grip on the lantern. They all knew what it meant. The tribe was already on the move. How long before 100 angry warriors came pounding on Jake's door? Dawn's first light crept in pale ribbons across the plain. Jake stood outside the barn door, a white bedsheet tied to a broom handle in his grip. The morning air reeked of dew and smoke from last night's signal fires. Silas hovered at his side, face drawn and gray in the half-light. Nora lingered just behind, one hand on the barn wall for support. From the east, shapes emerged on horseback. A dozen Lakota warriors advancing slowly. Spears and rifles glinted in the growing light. Jake raised the makeshift white flag high, heart hammering. He had slung his rifle across his back, muzzle down to show he meant no harm. Then one rider broke from the line at a gallop. An older man, with 2 eagle feathers in his hair, slid off his horse and rushed toward Jake. It was Chief Running Elk himself. The chief's lined face clenched with relief as he saw his son's chest rise and fall. Jake carefully transferred the boy into the chief's arms. For an instant, all aggression paused as the father cradled his child. Nora exhaled in relief. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked from the tree line. The peace shattered in a heartbeat. Silas jerked and collapsed to the dirt with a cry, blood blossoming on his shoulder. Another shot whistled past Jake's ear, splintering the barn door behind him. Red Knife roared in outrage, thinking it a betrayal. He yanked an arrow from his quiver and loosed it wildly. The arrow thudded into the porch post inches from Nora. Chaos erupted. The Lakota warriors wheeled their horses and retreated with the chief shielding his son, dust swirling in their wake. Jake dropped to his knees beside Silas, pressing his hands over the old man's wound. Warm blood seeped through Jake's fingers and into the dirt. Silas gasped. From the tree line, hoofbeats thundered as unseen attackers fled north. He looked up at the rising sun in horror. In seconds, their fragile peace had turned to bloodshed. The chief and his son were gone, but Red Knife's fury remained. Jake's gaze hardened as he caught a glimpse of a distant rider with a long rifle disappearing into the scrub. His stomach turned. He recognized that riding stance. It belonged to a ghost from his past. Was this ambush the work of his fallen brother? And if so, what vengeance would rain down upon them all now? Jake and Nora dragged Silas inside the farmhouse and laid him on the kitchen table. The midday sun baked the dry fields outside. Through the open door drifted the coppery smell of Silas's blood as Nora stitched his wound with trembling hands. Each weak groan from the old man tightened the coil of anger in Jake's chest. He clenched his fists, listening for hoofbeats or war cries in the distance. He grabbed his revolver from a locked trunk under the floorboards, checking it was fully loaded. Next came his gun belt and a Winchester repeater he hadn't touched in years. Nora looked up from Silas and her breath caught. Jake strapped the belt across his waist. "Don't," Nora pleaded softly. "You're not that man anymore, Jake. Please, we can still find another way." She tied off the bandage with shaking fingers. Jake's heart thundered in his ears. Another way. He recalled the promise he'd made over a decade ago, to lay down his guns for good. But that oath never accounted for a day like today. "They shot first," he said, voice low and flinty. "I won't lose anyone else." He stepped out onto the porch. In the yard, he upturned a heavy wooden table for cover and scattered nails beneath window sills. He hauled a rain barrel against the barn door to fortify it. Sweat stung his eyes. On the horizon, pillars of smoke rose from the Lakota camp as faint war drums echoed a steady pulse. Nora hovered by the doorway, wringing her apron. "Maybe if we just explain it was a misunderstanding." Jake cut her off, shaking his head. "Red Knife won't listen now, not after that blood's been spilled." He swallowed hard, looking at Silas through the doorway. The old man lay unconscious, chest barely rising. If he rode for a doctor, Nora would be defenseless. If he stayed, Silas could die. Every choice tasted like ash. As dusk fell, coyotes yipped in the distance. Nora lit a single oil lamp, its light quivering on the cabin walls. Jake checked his pocket watch by the flame. Nearly 9 p.m. He thumbed the engraved cover open and shut in a nervous rhythm. Inside was a tiny tintype photograph of his late wife smiling. Her eyes seemed to ask him what he would live with come dawn, his vow or his loved ones. Outside, a chorus of ululating war cries suddenly pierced the night air. Jake's blood turned cold. He blew out the lamp, plunging them into darkness. Orange embers glowed on the far ridge, torches, dozens of them. Nora pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. Jake took a position by the front window. Midnight came and went with the whoops and drumming never stopping. Neither side would sleep tonight. Jake's muscles ached, but he refused to close his eyes. In the tense silence before dawn, he reached over and squeezed Nora's shoulder once. They both knew the sun would bring a reckoning. When first light finally broke, A line of mounted warriors appeared at the fence line. Red Knife stood at the fore, paint streaked across his face, hatred set in his eyes. 100 strong, they fanned out, surrounding the farmhouse and barn as Jake and Nora watched from cover. Would this sunrise mark his redemption, or the end of everything he loved? Red Knife raised his arm and let out a bone-chilling whoop. In an instant, the warriors charged. A volley of arrows whistled through the dawn air. Jake ducked as one smashed through the window, thudding into the wall above Silas's body. Another arrow struck the roof thatch, sparks raining onto the floor. The acrid smell of smoke curled inside the house. Gunshots cracked from both sides. Jake popped up and fired his Winchester. The recoil slammed his shoulder as a warrior tumbled from his saddle, clutching a wounded leg. Nora pumped the shotgun and blasted once, the boom echoing. The buckshot peppered the ground in front of the onrushing attackers, scattering a few horses. A bullet punched through the door inches from Jake's head. He staggered back, ears ringing. Outside, a warrior let out a scream as he stepped on the nails Jake had strewn, collapsing to the dirt. But more figures swarmed toward the porch, undeterred by the gunfire. Red Knife himself leapt off his horse and rallied 2 braves forward, drawing a gleaming hatchet from his belt. Suddenly, the dry hay of the barn ignited behind the house. A flaming arrow had found its mark. Fire roared, and black smoke billowed into the sky. Nora coughed, eyes watering, as smoke seeped into the farmhouse. "They'll burn us out," she cried over the chaos. Jake's mind raced. If the flames spread, they'd be forced to run for cover in the open. With a snarl, Red Knife charged through the blown-open doorway. Jake barely had time to raise his rifle and parry the swinging hatchet. Wood splintered as the rifle stock met steel. Red Knife was strong. He slammed into Jake like a bull, sending them both crashing across the table that held Silas. The old man rolled off with a groan, forgotten amid the struggle. Pain exploded in Jake's side as Red Knife's fist found his ribs. The warrior pinned Jake to the floorboards, bellowing with rage and triumph. Smoke swirled around them and heat licked at the walls. Nora was screaming Jake's name, but his vision blurred. Red Knife raised his bloody hatchet high, the edge poised to split Jake's skull. Could anything save him now? At the last possible second, a shotgun blast boomed. Red Knife roared in pain as Nora's birdshot tore into his shoulder. The hatchet missed Jake's head by a hair, biting into the floor. Jake seized the moment. With a desperate heave, he threw Red Knife off and pinned the warrior face down. His revolver pressed against Red Knife's heaving back. All around, the battle ground to a halt. Warriors stood panting, arrows nocked but not released. He thought of his wife's photo and Silas and the boy he'd saved. No, he would not spill more blood today. Slowly, Jake eased the gun away and released Red Knife. Suddenly, a rifle cracked from the tree line. Jake braced, but felt only a sharp tug at his chest. He looked down to see a flattened bullet fall from his vest, caught by the old pocket watch now shattered in his pocket. Across the yard, a lone rider cursed in frustration. Cain. The outlaw urged his horse forward for a final attack, eyes wild with hate. Before Jake could move, Red Knife sprang to his feet beside him. With a guttural cry, the warrior hurled his hatchet. The spinning blade struck Cain's rifle, knocking it aside. Jake followed with a single well-placed shot, sending Cain tumbling from his saddle with a wounded leg. Cain lay in the dust, howling in pain. For a moment, only heavy breathing and crackling flames filled the air. The war was over. The Lakota forces lowered their weapons as Chief Running Elk helped Red Knife stand. The chief's stern gaze met Jake's. Then the proud leader raised his hand in a gesture of respect. Jake returned the nod, understanding passing between former enemies. Mercy had won. Nora rushed to help Silas, dousing the flames, and Lakota warriors moved in to assist. Amid the wreckage of the farmyard, Chief Running Elk laid a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. "You saved my son, and you saved us all." After the smoke cleared, plans were made for a ceremony of peace. Talk of a marriage alliance rose to unite their peoples. Jake stood humble at the center, a reformed outlaw finally at peace with his past. Even scars of hatred can heal when honor and compassion hold the reins. Subscribe now for more stories of courage and redemption.